What's up, everyone? Be the Installer here to show you a cool comparison between 120-inch ultra short throw Hisense L5G and the TCL 98-inch R754. So pretty cool. I'm happy and grateful to have both in the house at the same time to do a video like this, to be able to show you the differences between these two and maybe figure out what would be best for you. We're going to go over the different physical features of these two, show scale to you, throw in a 65-inch here just to show you what it looks like compared to these two monsters, before showing you the operating systems and some SDR content, sports, gaming, HDR movies, all that. And then at the end, show you some buying advice, maybe which kind of rooms that these are best for, and maybe which one of them you should buy. So stick around and make sure to smash the like button, subscribe, and hit the notification bell and all that. And let me know if you have an opinion right off the bat. Would you buy one of these two? Which one? Let me know in the comments. Let's get into it. So I just want to let you know right off the bat too that we have dimmed down the TV and the projector a bit to even them out for this comparison. It's very difficult to show two different TVs or a TV and a projector with all the variables that have to do with YouTubing and showing them on screen and the camera and the shutter speed and all that. But at the end of the video, we will have them both unleashed so you can get a full understanding of which one of these is brighter and which one is better for you and your conditions. So let's get into the scale and size, and then we'll go over some of the features. All right, for starters, we have a 65-inch Sony X90K here to show you the scale, how big that is compared to each of these other two screens. And this is 1.5 feet forward, so I mean, if it was back even further, it would probably look a little bit smaller. And I'm 6'2", I have pretty long arms, and I mean, these TVs are just massive. So you have a 120-inch screen, a 98-inch TV, and a 65-inch to show you the scale. So I hope that gives you some context about how big these things are and how they look in a room, because this wall is really, really big, so having a 65 or even a 75 and even an 83-inch TV in this room, it makes it look a lot smaller because of how much wall space and because of how far we sit away from the TV. And that might be something you need to keep in consideration when buying a TV or a projector. So the TCL 98-inch has 4 HDMI ports on it. 2 of them are HDMI 2.1, where you get 4K at 120 frames per second, and the other 2 are 4K 60. So you can connect 4 different devices, including a soundbar or a stereo system connected to the eARC port, which takes away one of the HDMI 2.1. So if you have multiple gaming systems, that can be an issue if you also have a soundbar or speaker system. The TCL has downward firing speakers under the TV, and it has a small sub or driver on the back from Onkyo, though the sound of the TV isn't that great, and I would recommend getting a soundbar instead. And the Hisense L5G projector, on the other hand, has a couple of forward-facing speakers that sound good enough that I don't think you'd necessarily need a soundbar. On the back, it only has 3 HDMI inputs. 2 of them are HDMI 2.1 that can do 4K at 120, and again, one of those is the eARC port. So you still have an opportunity to connect 1 gaming console, 1 soundbar or system, and then another cable box or something else that can plug into the 4K 60. So next thing to do is to get into some content, and to get a better comparison, I wanted to darken the room so that you could see the max contrast, how these look in a dark room, and we'll show you them again maxed out and in a bright room in a bit. But for comparison's sake, I just thought it would be better to show these in a dark room without any side effects or any other variables. First, I wanted to show you the different operating systems. We have on the Hisense the older Android TV, and on the TCL we have the updated Google OS, as it were. Both of them, again, are by Google. They look very similar in some instances, but as you scroll down on both of these, they still have a lot of the same things, like the different apps that you can get, and then they have what can be played next or continue watching, and things that are maybe recommended. And again, they seem very similar after using both of these different OSs, that I don't see a whole lot different, and I think I'd be fine with either one of them, especially over some of the other TV brands. And if you don't like these, obviously you can get an Apple TV or a Roku stick or a NVIDIA Shield and so on. So a lot of options out there, and I think these are just fine, the OS. But let's get into YouTube TV here and check out how these look with sports in this darker room. So now we have some SDR content on YouTube TV, some cable sports to show you what these two look like when playing similar content. And what I can tell you is that the TCL seems to upscale a little bit better. The Hisense on the right here just looks a little bit more pixelated. It's probably that it's trying to project it on a 120-inch screen versus a 98-inch screen. That does make a difference. Obviously, as you get larger, the pixel density gets worse or lower. But I would have to say that the TCL in general does a better job with motion, specifically when you're watching sports and things are moving fast on screen, whereas the Hisense seems to break up a bit and look a little bit more pixelated. The TCL is obviously brighter, and honestly, it's pretty difficult for us to show the TCL handicap down to the level of where the Hisense is. The Hisense is pretty much at full brightness, and it is fine in this darker room, but as we show you a little bit later, it's not going to be so great when it's in a brighter room. But overall, I think either one of these two would be fine for watching these sort of sports, news, cable, depending on your room and conditions. All right, so let's move over to HDR, because I think that's why you'd buy a big screen like this, is to watch some HDR movies. So let's check that out. All right, so we're on HDR movie. We have Encanto, which is a movie that we've used to compare and contrast different TVs on the channel. And as you can see, both of these look pretty good in a dark room. Not too many complaints. Again, the TCL is a bit dimmed down in order to make this comparison, but both screens look great in a dark room. For me personally, when watching the Hisense, I've had a bit of an issue with the motion. It seems like the projector just gives off that soap opera effect, whether you have the settings high or low with regards to its motion enhancement. Whereas the TCL seemed to be a little bit easier to get to one side or the other, whether you like to see it in its normal 24 frames per second or if you like to see it with more of the soap opera effect. So definitely seems like the TCL has an advantage with regards to getting different motion, but the Hisense still looks great in a dark room when watching HDR movies. One thing that we're noticing when looking at these two different screens side by side is that it seems like the Hisense has better contrast, or maybe you would say that it looks better on the right. But really, it just seems like it's a bit of a lack of luminance on the projector because the TCL is able to get much brighter. And again, we have it dimmed down in this instance because it wouldn't really help to have it super bright in this dark room, and then we wouldn't be able to show both of these side by side. So in a bit, I'm going to show you the TCL at full brightness and how much darker the Hisense is and how they both look in a brighter room. But let's get on to some gaming, because there's definitely some differences on these two TVs for gaming as well. So on to gaming, and both of these displays can do 4K at 120. Currently playing 4K 60 because we're playing on the PS5, which is split to two different screens, but there is an obvious difference in input lag on these two, where the TCL is very quick and responsive and you can stay alive in games like Call of Duty, but on the right, the Hisense is much more delayed, and honestly, by the time you actually press the trigger and shoot, you're in a different spot than you think you are. And it's displays like the Hisense that make it really difficult to be competitive in these gaming situations, where people talk about, response rate, input lag, talk about VRR and having the ability not to have the screen tear. Well, if you can't even keep up with where you're at in the game and you get shot and killed, it's very difficult to even show you guys these comparisons because we don't have any good footage. Luckily, my editor Eric is looking at the display on the left, the TCL, and it's very quick, responsive, good color, good contrast, and not bad for a 98-inch QLED at this price. However, if you had the Hisense, you probably would be just fine playing slower paced games that don't depend on how fast your reflexes are in order to be competitive and beat other people. Again, in a dark room, they both look pretty decent. I like the look of both of them. The TCL is brighter, but I do like on the Hisense the deep contrast, maybe again the lack of luminance. It's not quite as bright as you might like it, but overall pretty cool, and the fact that they're both so large and immersive is a huge positive over a lot of the other TVs, but you're paying a price for that. So let's turn the lights on and talk about some of the pros and cons before offering some buying advice. Okay, so now we turn the lights on and you can see that there's a big difference between the two screens. On the left, the TCL is not great at reflecting light. You can see a lot of the light that's reflected in it back at you, so it's not amazing for a bright room. But on the other hand, the Hisense projector loses a lot of contrast, and maybe it's not super evident because it's more of a matte finish or the automatic light rejecting sort of finish, but it's much harder to see with good contrast, with good luminance. It just looks a lot more bland or washed out. So I don't know which one of these would be more preferable to you in a brighter room. So now I'm going to raise the brightness up on the TCL so that we can see how it looks with those light reflecting, and to kind of contrast it versus the Hisense that again isn't nearly as bright. So obviously here you can see where the TCL has a big advantage. It's much brighter. You can't see the light in the background any longer. At least it's not as potent as it was before, and it really shows how much of an advantage a QLED has over an ultra short throw projector. at least this L5G that just can't compete. I think it has 2700 lumen, which is just not going to cut it when you're talking about 1000 nit QLED on the left. Now, this kind of brightness is only really necessary in a brighter room, and if you had a dark movie room, the ultra short throw might still be an option, especially since it's half the price of the TCL. Now, it's not all roses with the TCL. There are some downsides to a QLED, which are things like the dirty screen effect that sometimes show uniformity issues in the light coming from the panel, as well as blooming, which is the inability to perfectly control the contrast, where you have the dimming zones behind kind of bleeding into the widescreen bars or other areas that can affect the contrast. Now, this TCL is pretty good with both of those things. Didn't have a ton of DSE, and the blooming control is pretty good. But that just depends on the panel, and we can't guarantee one will look exactly the same as the other. In addition, in the TCL, the viewing angles are not great. So as you walk off axis, or if you're sitting in a wide room, it's hard to see it from an angle. So if you have a lot of people watching in a wider area, you just expect it's not going to look quite as good from the sides as it will from straight on like the camera is. The Hisense screen, as far as viewing angles, it actually looks as good or better from angles. I was pretty surprised to see that this ultra short throw can keep its contrast and color volume when going off angle. But on the other hand, we do have a bit of dust that's forming down on the lens cap or cover, I guess what you'd say, covering up the area that emits the light. And we actually had a little drip of something that we had to clean off. So you have a couple tools to do that, but you know, it did display a bit of dirty screen at the bottom of the screen because there was a little speck of dirt on there that you have to constantly monitor. And there's also the fact that you have a projector and a stand that's displaying this that could be moved. And I'm constantly concerned the kids are going to move it or hit it or something, the dog, same thing, and then have to recalibrate the screen. So that's another issue. Whereas with the TV, it's just one piece, you hang it on the wall, you're good, no issues like that. But on the other hand, if you have a dedicated theater room and you want this massive screen, this is a great option, and actually better than having a rear projector that you have to wire in a different manner. There's a lot more cords. This projector just sits underneath the screen and is much more convenient. So that leads us to our final buying advice. Now, thinking about the TCL, it is a $8,500 TV right now, where this 120-inch Hisense L5G is $4,000 and the 100-inch is actually $3,000. So obviously, if you're in a darker room, you can get this massive 120-inch for about half the price of the TCL. But do you have a dedicated theater room to put this in, or are you going to need it to work better in the broad daylight or in a brighter room, where the TCL has a huge brightness advantage and therefore can knock down the light better because it's a combination of the brighter screen and the anti-reflective coating, where the light rejection screen is okay, but in a bright room, not so much. So you have to let me know, what do you guys think? Do you have your eyes on a large QLED like this or a massive projector? Let me know in the comments. Let me know if there's any other questions you might have. Smash the like button, subscribe, set the notification bell to all. Check out another video so you can be the installer.